Today we're beginning the series that we generally do here in the month of January, looking at our brethren roots and getting a little bit of orientation towards what it means to be part of the Church of the Brethren, the family that we are a part of. So, our first quiz for the new year. Anybody know when the Church of the Brethren started?
Pop quiz?
1708.
1708, yeah. So we have longtime Church of the Brethren folks here, yeah, who know that date by heart. So beginning of the 18th century, Alexander Mack was is considered to be our founder, and this is one of the early symbols that was created. And you can see A&M, of course, for Alexander Mack. But there are two streams in particular that are part of the Church of the Brethren. One is called pietism, represented by the heart. That's a warm heart. That's, your devotion to Jesus, and it's a living faith, something that's incredibly important, this idea of spirituality, that both for the community and for individuals. And then I guess those are grapes. They look kind of like berries, but they're grapes. Fruitfulness in terms of living and representing Anabaptism. And so those two things, a book, Dale Brown was one of our professors in seminary. He wrote a book all about understanding pietism, and to understand this kind of emphasis on spirituality, being connected to Jesus, and how that changes one's life. And then Anabaptism at 500. We've been talking at different points about the new Anabaptist Bible that came out of this kind of remembrance and celebration. 1525. So we have pietism, which is really the 17th century, 1600s. And a part of that context has to do with, maybe you've heard of what's called the 30 Years' War that was in Europe in the early part of the 17th century. Warfare that basically lasted, in different places or whatever, mostly over religion, although other issues were part of that. And then the Anabaptist movement, which really predates that by about a century, early 16th century. So we have these two streams that are important for Church of the Brethren that coming about. So I want to reflect on Anabaptism in particular today and think about it in terms of our context. We've moved into this new year, 4 days in already. Lots of things that are happening, such as Venezuela, that are giving many of us pause of what's going on. It really is, and I'm not sure that this is ever not true, but it's a time of upheaval. I mean, we came out of a global pandemic in the last few years, and I don't think we as a society have really dealt with that in a very good way. I mean, the number of people that died and the impact that's had upon our culture, we're still kind of reeling from that. There's newish technology. I mean, the whole AI thing, we don't know where that's going or how good that's going to be. It's definitely having an impact. I mean, there's one of the things about AI is it decentralizes information, but it also can be used for nefarious means. I mean, and we're seeing some of that as well. I'm sure maybe you've seen this idea of a gap between the rich and the poor, and there's some statistics about how many more billionaires there are today than ever, and some of the negativity of that, how that's impacting our political processes here in our country, but really worldwide. I mean, there's this massive gap between rich and poor, urban and rural. I always have a hard time with that. Rural kind of places, and folks that are dealing with that. And the whole idea of church and state, and how the church is being cozied up to the state, how it's being weaponized. And I saw this week that just kind of floored me. I don't know if you've ever heard of Paula White. She's a Pentecostal kind of preacher, an advisor for Donald Trump. And the day after Christmas, she said, to say no to President Trump would be saying no to God. I mean, I'm, there's some real issues with that. But it's a reflection of some of the things in terms of Christian thinking, but also just in general, how do we treat each other? How do we think about who's in charge? I really think this is idolatrous, but we'll unpack that a little more. You'll maybe not be able to read this really well. And this is not MAGA religion, if you want to call it that, make America great. Just some of the things that we're seeing, wrestling with. Mocking the disabled is acceptable. Never apologize. Never admit you're wrong. Name calling is cool. Science is stupid. Empathy is a weakness. Fear those who are different. Cheating means you are smart. Bullying people means you are strong. Stealing from charities is acceptable. Reading is a waste of time. Lying is a key to success. Always blame others. Always take credit for the hard work of others. Now, I'm not going to say that that's reflective of everyone who may be, this whole idea of MAGA or whatever, but there's certainly plenty of this kind of thing going on. Plenty of this is antithetical to the way of thinking about Jesus and the ways of Jesus. And, it is reflecting in our political process. Again, you won't be able to see this really well. Yeah, that's a crusader, the Crusades kind of image. This is from a congressman from Tennessee. We must stand and reaffirm that this is a Christian nation. This is a battle of good versus evil. All right? Tying in again to this whole idea of all the things that were mentioned in the previous slide. Good versus evil means there are no survivors. I mean, this is a battle to the end, right, kind of thing. We're seeing this in our culture. And it's having impacts in some ways upon who we are and what we're thinking about. And I had this one, I didn't know whether I should put this slide in, but it's a dark night when you look at the news and are forced to admit that you no longer believe in the power of the FIFA Peace Prize. Now, I don't know if you know what FIFA is, but that's the soccer organization, the World Cup. And our president was given a peace prize, and again, another reflection upon where we are as a culture. Well, I got news for you. None of this is new. This is a book I read after college. I had never heard of Anabaptists. And that's okay. I mean, it's a part of the history of Christian thinking that doesn't get a lot of like I said, maybe there were professors in college who told me about this, but it didn't make an impression on me. Came out of college, went into a Church of the Brethren congregation doing youth and campus ministry. The pastor gave me this book, or told me about this book. I didn't bring it today, but I still have it. Called The Anabaptist Story. And I don't know if you know much about Anabaptism, but that previous slide, 1525, this movement gets started. And the issues are much like the issues that we're, just talked about today. Church and state were so closely inclined. The whole thing about infant baptism was your citizenship card, right? You became part of, church and state together. So those kinds of records were going to be used for military service, for taxation, all those kinds of things. And so when Anabaptists said, hey, we're not so sure that's a good thing, we don't want to do that anymore, that created a lot of issues. Ever hear of the bubonic plague? The Black Death? That was early 15th century, but really for like 100 years or more, that was having an impact on people and society and thinking and how to deal with that, how to care for those. I mean, there are some estimates that half of the European population died during those 100 years. I mean, we know how bad, the COVID was. Much, much, much bigger. In terms of technology, AI, the printing press, right? I mean, we kind of generally know that. The printing press really revolutionized information, much more available. Literacy rates going up. People reading the Bible for themselves. Pamphlets were really important in terms of pamphleting was kind of like the internet of today, making available information. That was dangerous in terms of the status quo and people in power. And see, Anabaptists, they were interested in communities following the ways of Jesus and people, talking about nonviolence, shared leadership, men and women, right? I mean, obviously, in that context, a little different than today, but they were sort of about issues like peace and economic sharing in terms of what you might call mutual aid, right? We were talking about that in Sunday school a little bit. How you care for all persons. Taking the Beatitudes seriously, Sermon on the Mount. We often talk about that as part of who we are. Blessed are the merciful and the peacemakers. Well, that was not well received. And we talked about Martyr's Mirror. This is a book of martyrdoms throughout Christian history, but particularly in the 16th century, excuse me, when the Anabaptist movement. There are probably 3,000 to 4,000 stories in this pretty big book. There's a lot of martyrdoms, just of Anabaptists being drowned, being burned at the stake, quartered, all that sort of stuff. I mean, this Anabaptist movement was not looked upon very nicely. That's not even close to the word. I mean, that many stories and however many more that weren't part of that, because they were trying to deal with, this situation, and the fact that a 30 years war could come out of religious stuff. One of the stories that's told is, a woman who's brought to trial, and they're like, what do you do at these mysterious meetings where people come together and they're reading the Bible for themselves, talking about the Bible? And her statement was, we talk of nothing other than the love of God. The love of God. And so, the Anabaptist storybook, if you're interested, it's not the easiest read, but it was one that impacted me greatly in terms of thinking about Church of the Brethren. Well, our passage today is from the book of Micah. Micah's 6 or 7 chapters, pretty small. There's some who say Micah is sort of a distillation of the book of Isaiah. Isaiah is 66 chapters, I believe. So I could give you a homework assignment to go read Isaiah, but I won't. Go read Micah if you get a chance. 6 or 7 chapters, you can probably do it in 15 minutes or so. As it was read, it talks about God's people being on trial. This is a court case that God is bringing against his people, God's people. Why? Because of things like idolatry, not following God's ways. And there's passages interspersed in the book that talk about the coveting of fields and houses and defrauding people, of false prophets leading people astray. Priests teach for a price. Leaders judge for a bribe. Prophets tell fortunes for money. We'd look at those passages if we had time, but you'll find all that kind of dialogue of this court case, really. The prosecuting attorney, so to speak, against God's people. But it also has, a message of hope that God will bring God's people back to Jerusalem and to where they came from. And that's the key in understanding this. This isn't an exile period where the people have been judged, the Babylonians came in, temples destroyed, people have been exiled. And God says, why does this happen? Well, you guys kind of messed it up. And this passage that Gail mentioned in terms of it being part of the Brethren 90s or 80s. Anyway, a passage that the Brethren Church said is one of its places that they were going to put emphasis upon. To do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with your God. Anybody ever hear that passage? Yeah, it's a well-known one from the book of Micah. The Good News Translation, I sometimes have some issues with it, but this one I think they got it right, because I'm going to read this. The Lord has told us what is good. What he requires of us is this: to do what is just, to show constant love, to do kindness, right? I really like this translation of it, to show constant love. It really emphasizes that what the Anabaptist movement was all about was showing love and being not just kind in the hi, how are you, but taking care of each other, and to live in humble fellowship with God. So, brand new book. I haven't read this one yet. It's on my list. It's called The New Anabaptists. And there's movements, and this book describes those movements in England, in Britain, that are taking this legacy seriously about Anabaptism. Really is important in terms of the Church of the Brethren to understand who we are. We're about, connecting to Jesus, the warm heart, the pietism. We're also about this Anabaptist kind of thing. They got lots of folks in trouble. And frankly, the Paula Whites of the world, I think, have missed, the mark in terms of understanding the biblical message. We were chatting in Sunday school. Why does the Department of Defense become the Department of War, right? And God is a warrior, that kind of language. We're seeing that, how that's seeping into our culture and the whole MAGA thing. So, The New Anabaptist looks like a very interesting book. I'm going to just briefly go through some of the points that it talks about. Interpreting and following the way of Jesus, and that's kind of a pietist kind of thing, but the following the way of Jesus is not just a warm heart, but doing those things, living simply. Maybe you've ever heard the phrase, living simply so others can simply live. That was also something that brethren have talked about. Multi-voice worship and biblical interpretation. It's understanding that there are multiple voices in the Bible. Sometimes they're in harmony, but sometimes there's a discussion about what's right and what's wrong. And one of the things that brethren have always said is, you can read the Bible, I can read the Bible, we need to talk about it together, right? And hear the other voices, whether that comes from men, women, other races, other cultures. Those are things that are important to us. Right now, we need to listen to our Venezuelan brethren, and they're issuing some statements, and we're hearing some of their viewpoints in terms of what's going on in the world today. Baptizing would-be disciples. Obviously, baptism of infants, that was an issue for the Anabaptists in the 16th century. Today, it's a little different. We don't see baptism as an entrance into, like your card carrying, now you're a follower. Baptism is, I want to be a disciple. I am attracted to Jesus. Jesus is someone I want to be an important part of my life. And so, Anabaptists today don't say, well, you have to be rebaptized as an adult. Sometimes if you've been baptized in another setting as an infant, whatever, it can be a new understanding of that. And then some folks will decide. And Gail's been working with some folks about the possibility of baptism, to do it as it's a sign that you want to be part of the community and to be a part with these folks who want to follow Jesus. Communion as a piecemeal, not something that you do because it does something magical to you, but it's coming together and remembering who Jesus is. Non-hierarchical leadership, men, women, priesthood of all believers. Heard of that phrase? That's another one. Comes out of kind of the Anabaptist idea that all of us can be part of that. Consensual decision making. We do some voting about some issues, but really what it's about is coming together and saying, okay, I need to listen to you, you need to listen to me, and we need to work at understanding this, which is part of mutual accountability and peacemaking and mutual aid. Those are all things that are about how do we get along with each other? Because I'm really different from most of you. I think differently, I look differently, I act differently. That's true of all of us. And the message of Jesus is that diversity is good, and it's okay that you think differently. We need to figure out how we can live with one another in peace. Telling the truth, sometimes that means, confronting some of that idolatrous stuff we're hearing from the culture. The Anabaptists certainly did that, and we got to be willing to do that as well. And that may get us into some conflict with folks. Our witness in word and lifestyle. So these are all kinds of things this new Anabaptist book kind of goes into. Had a chance to look at some of that and the legacy of that and how we can live into that today. You're not going to be able to read this real well. Howard Thurman was a 20th century pastor, theologian, African American. In terms of Christmas, this is one of, you'll see this on the internet. Coming out of Advent, coming out of Christmas. When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flock, the work of Christmas begins to find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among others, to make music in the heart. Pietism and baptism kind of together. So, Micah 6:8. To act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly. There's good reason why the church picked that as one of their primary verses. Now you know it's also in the context of this court case, right? That God calls against his people saying, hey, go. Again, I'm going to give you your homework. Go home, read Micah. And see this verse in the context of God calling us to love one another and to love justice, kindness, and mercy. Amen.